Duval. We thank Cornel West for being on today. We thank Cornel Belcher for being on today. And now we talk to Ty Pinkins. He's the independent U.S. Senate candidate in Mississippi. Why leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent in Mississippi, of all places? Ty Pinkins, good to have you on. How are you, sir?
Tavis, thank you for having me on. I appreciate being here.
It's my pleasure. You may or may not know I am born in Mississippi, so I am always happy to talk to any good Mississippian. So glad to have you on the program for a few minutes. Tell me about this, for starters, for those who are not following this, tell me about this all-important race. Every race is important in these midterms to see if the Democrats can win back the House, maybe even win back the Senate. Tell me about this Senate race in Mississippi.
Well, Tavis, thanks again for having me on. I've been doing this for a couple of years now. This is not my first time running in Mississippi. I ran last cycle against the senior senator here in Mississippi, and now I'm running against Cindy Hyde-Smith to represent Mississippi in the United States Senate. And I think what people have to understand is Mississippi is a unique place, particularly when you talk about our racial demographics in this state. Mississippi is the blackest state by percentage than any state in this country. And so when you take that into consideration and the voting power of the black people here in Mississippi, that this Senate race is extremely important and is winnable in this state. And I think once we start to realize that, whether you're talking about the Democratic Party or even independents, then we can see what opportunity existed here in Mississippi, and that's why I'm running.
When you say winnable, unpack that for me. It is the blackest state. And yet it has not sent a whole lot of black folk to Congress. We just had Benny Thompson on this program a couple of weeks ago. But when you say winnable in Mississippi as a black man statewide, unpack that for me.
Well, we have to vote strategically in Mississippi, and I don't think we've been doing it over the last several decades. Here's a data point for you. Since 1982, a Democrat hasn't won the United States Senate seat in Mississippi. That was nearly 50 years ago. Since then, there have been 15 United States Senate races in Mississippi. And the person running as a Republican has won 15 straight times. And I'll give you one guess as to how many times the person running as a Democrat has won in the state of Mississippi. Now, even though we are the blackest state in the country, that does not mean the state of Mississippi is not polarized politically, where you have the majority of black people vote Democrat and the majority of white people vote Republican. But there's a group of people in the middle, independents. A recent Gallup poll showed that 45% of Americans consider themselves independents, 27% consider themselves Democrats, and 27% consider themselves Republicans. I think, given that historical data, that nearly 50 years of Democrats being defeated in this state, even though nearly 40% of this state is African American, once we get enough black voters to commit to voting for an independent candidate, joining that 45% of independents, then we can become viable. And that's why I think my independent candidacy is so powerful here in Mississippi, especially given the fact that I have name recognition, having run in the past a couple of election cycles.
Yep. I think you and I might not disagree on this. I've said this so many times in my career. If I had a dime for every time I said it, I'd be independently wealthy. But my read for so long has been that Republicans tend to ignore black voters and Democrats too often take black voters for granted. You're running as an independent. The question is how then, even though Democrats have so often taken, again, black voters for granted, how do you get black voters in particular to consider voting for an independent candidate? What does that mean? How do you do that?
I think you speak to that issue. You continue to speak to the issues that matter to them, whether that be healthcare, whether that be making sure that people in low-income communities have access to quality education, whether that be making sure that we raise the minimum wage to a livable wage, speaking to those issues that affect black people in this state. I'm from the 2nd Congressional District, which just so happens to be Congressman Thompson's district. And that's where the largest proportion of black people in this state reside. That is a powerful, powerful voting bloc. But we also have to take into consideration that we have a lot of independents up in DeSoto County, up in North Mississippi. We have a ton of independents down on the Gulf Coast in Harrison County, which ironically just passed Hinds County, which encompasses our state capital, Jackson. Harrison County just passed Hinds County population-wise. And there's a lot of people who have imported from outside the state who are independent voters. So speaking to that demographic and being frank with them and honest with them. And one of the things that I tell voters here in Mississippi is that both political parties have failed us. The Democratic Party has failed us and the Republican Party has failed us. And unless and until we start sending independents to Congress, we will continue to face the same issues that we've been facing, whether that be healthcare, whether that be making sure that people can afford their groceries, making sure that we have quality schools that can educate our children. On all of those levels, we will continue to struggle until we send independents to Congress, particularly the United States Senate.
Tell me more about your decision to leave the Democratic Party, Ty Pinkins.
Well, here's my decision. I don't think Democrats are bad. Mm-hmm. I think they mean well. But I think in Mississippi, the Democratic Party does not have the foundation, the structure, nor that necessary team to do what Mississippians, especially Black people in Mississippi, need to move those same issues forward. Think about this. Democrats say that they are for poor people. Mm-hmm. Democrats say that they are for women's rights. Democrats say that they are for veterans and education. Well, Mississippi is the poorest state in the country, and the 2nd congressional district, which is the blackest area in this country, Mississippi has the highest maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate in this country, and that disproportionately affects Black women. Why hasn't the party invested in the state party to make sure that the state with the highest percentage of Black people are viable, are competitive? And I think that is a problem. We can't keep bumping our head up against the wall when I'll say it again, that since 1982, a person running as a, now I'm not championing Republican causes. I'm not a Republican, but I also not vote for a party that's continuously losing 15 straight election cycles over the last 50 years, doing the same thing over and over again, as they say, is insanity. Yeah. So that doesn't make sense to me. That's like saying, if I have a football team that's played 15 straight seasons, and I bet on that football team 15 straight times, and I've lost every single time when everything is on the line, and I got my last token to bet, I'm going to bet on that same team again when 45% of Americans identify as independents. It just doesn't make sense to me, Tavis. And that's one of the reasons I left the Democratic Party. And the other reason I left the Democratic Party is because I think both parties have their hand in the cookie jar. Yeah. The big money cookie jar. Both parties, leaders in both parties have been bought and paid for by big monies. And because of that, they can't adequately represent the American people. And that's why we need independents who, to go to Washington, D.C., who pledge to not buy, sell, or trade stock, not be owned by organizations like AIPAC, but be responsible and accountable to the American people, and in my case, the people of Mississippi.
Yep. I'll take your data point about losing seasons. I've been a Cowboys fan a long time. I'll leave it there. More with Ty Pinkins when we come forward. Tavis Smiley and Ty Pinkins, who is the independent Senate candidate in Mississippi, challenging U.S. Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith for this seat this year, 2026. So, again, he was a Democrat, now an independent, challenging the Republican junior senator in that state, Cindy Hyde-Smith. His book is called 23 Miles and Running, My American Journey from Chopping Cotton in the Mississippi Delta to Sleeping in the White House. My time is getting tight. I want to ask you a couple things right quick. Let me start, for starters, with this. No naivete here. As I said, I'm born in Mississippi, and I understand the legacy, how strong that legacy of white supremacy is in that state. But why do Black folk in that state in particular still lag far behind all these years later in every single leading economic indicator category, Ty?
I don't think that's the fault of Black people. I think that's the fault of the governmental process on the state level and our representatives on the federal level that ignore the plight of Black people in Mississippi. Black people have been surviving and thriving in the state of Mississippi, given the conditions that they find themselves under. The thing that's missing for Black people is representation. We have 4 congressional districts in our state. Congressman Thompson just happens to be representing one of them. On the other end of the spectrum, every statewide position in the state of Mississippi, from governor to lieutenant governor to secretary of state to attorney general to secretary of agriculture, is run by a Republican. And that's been that way for the last couple of decades. Mississippi hasn't elected a Democratic governor since 2004. That was 22 years ago. And over that same period of time, Mississippi hasn't moved forward from an economic perspective, from a healthcare perspective, from providing better education for our children. All of that is on the Republican leadership in this state. And on the federal level also, when you talk about Cindy Hyde-Smith and Roger Wicker, when they bring things into the state, it ironically skips over the largest district, which is the 2nd Congressional District, stretching from the northern part of our state all the way to the southern part of our state on the western border. Ignoring that district, which also just so happens to be African American, and implementing those policies and those economic drivers in parts of the state that are already wealthy. Representation matters.
No, I get it.
And that's why I think this my Senate candidate is so important.
On this President's Day, we just talked to Cornel West a little bit ago, and he, as you may recall, ran as an independent for president. Ty is running as an independent for the U.S. Senate seat out of Mississippi. So he's going to get asked the question that every independent gets asked when I come forward. What about the split the vote issue? You're listening to Tavis Smiley. And Ty Pinkins, he is a black man who is the U.S. Senate candidate, the independent U.S. Senate candidate, running to unseat Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith in Mississippi. And I've got 2 minutes left for your Ty, that I will yield the balance of my time to you, as they say in Washington, even though you're in Mississippi at the moment trying to get to Washington. You can't run as independent without being asked about that split the vote question. What's become your standard response?
I think the split the vote question is one of the questions I get the most on the campaign trail, particularly from African Americans. And it's a fair question to ask a candidate that's running for United States Senate. People's lives is on the line. And I tell black people, split the vote is a fallacy perpetuated by the two parties when they feel threatened, when they feel like there's a person in the race that threatens them. And I'm hearing it over and over again from the two parties. And I also point them to the 1982 data point that I shared with you. Half a century, 15 straight losses by the candidate running for United States Senate as a Democrat. My question is, split what vote? Split the second place vote? Second place gets you nothing in politics. And nowhere is that more clear than black people in Mississippi who have been voting religiously on statewide elections for Democratic candidates that have lost over and over again. Over and over. Unless and until we divorce ourselves from the idea that we just have to vote straight Democrat down the ballot instead of taking into consideration independent candidates, we'll still face the same things we've been facing over and over again in this state. Your listeners can go to typinkins.com, P as in Paul, INKINS.com to support my campaign, learn more about my campaign, and donate to my campaign to help me win this election.
He's the independent running for the Senate seat in Mississippi, a U.S. Army vet, author of the book, 23 Miles and Running, My American Journey from Chopping Cotton in the Mississippi Delta to Sleeping in the White House. He is Ty Pinkins. Ty, good to have you on. All the best to you on this President's Day and beyond, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brother Tavis. You have a good one.
More to have you. Good to have you on. You have a good one as well. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.